Read. Put the bag down. You're not coming back inside. Vivienne, we can talk about this inside. No, I'm done explaining your failures for you. Your consulting business is dead. Your accounts are empty, and I will not let a broke man drag my name down with him. Something small fell from the side pocket and struck the stone. My father's Old Navy and brass compass pin. Vivienne looked down at it and laughed. Take your little souvenir too. But Clara Voss, the Foundation's oldest trustee, stopped smiling. That pin, where did you get it? She said quietly. Vivienne kicked it toward my bag. From one of his failed businesses, probably. Clara stared at me. No, I've seen that mark before. I picked up the pin. Don't sell Northgate, Vivienne. Her face hardened. The board closes the deal this weekend, and by then you won't have a house, a seat at the table, or a wife. Then she shut the door and turned the lock. I stood on my own porch and listened to the bolt slide home. It made a small, ordinary sound. Decades of marriage, and the last thing I heard from inside my house was a piece of brass moving half an inch. The trustees walked to their cars without looking at me. Clara Voss stayed on the walkway a few seconds longer than the rest, her eyes on my hands, then on my face. She did not ask me anything else. She nodded once, the way people nod at a funeral, and left. I picked up the duffel. Everything Vivienne had decided was mine fit inside it. I could have made one phone call and had a car at that curb in minutes. A hotel floor, a security detail, a lawyer in that doorway before the neighbors finished pretending. Instead, I opened an app on a 5-year-old phone, waited a short while for a rideshare, and asked the driver to take me to the roadside hotel out past the freight yards. $41 a night. I paid with a debit card that worked. The room had 2 beds and 1 window facing the interstate. I set the duffel down and called a number that does not appear in any directory. A man answered on the second ring. Mr. Mercer? Do nothing, I said. There was a pause on the line. In more than 2 decades, that voice had never questioned me twice. Sir, if she's removed you from the residence, I said do nothing. Understood. And I hung up. And the room was quiet again, except for the trucks. I did not stay silent because I was noble. I stayed silent because I still believed silence was a test, and I had not realized how long I had been giving that test to my wife without telling her the rules. My phone rang a short while later. My sister. Sloane did not say hello. She's calling an emergency meeting, she said, the next morning, for Northgate. She's not talking about it as a future discussion anymore. She's moved the closing up. The signatures happen at Founders' Night in front of the donors as part of the program. That's only a few days away. That's only a few days, Sloane said. If those signatures go through, the trades hall shuts down. The apprentice program shuts down. The adults in that welding class go home and stay home. I did not say anything, and my sister has never had patience for my silences. You know, I keep thinking, she said. Maybe this is what happens when you make everybody guess who you are. I let that sit. She was not wrong, and both of us knew it. After she hung up, I went through the duffel, 2 shirts, a razor, a folder of tax documents, from a consulting company that had genuinely and completely failed. My father's watch. The side pocket was empty. I turned the bag inside out and shook it, and I already knew. I had picked the pin up off the walkway, and then Vivienne had said something, and I'd set it down somewhere between the porch step and the curb. My father put that pin in my hand the day the first warehouse opened, It was the only object in the world I would have gone back for, and going back was the one thing I could not do. I sat in that room a long time, and I made myself a list. Stop the closing. Find out why my wife had suddenly accelerated a sale she had spent years calling premature, and fix my marriage without ever telling her about Meridian Arc. Notice the third one. That was the mistake. I still believed I could steer the truth like a car. Here is what Vivienne knew about me, and it was not nothing. She knew I had built a small freight company out of a leased warehouse when I was 26. She knew it had done well. She knew there were old family investments held in trusts handled by people I did not talk about at dinner. Here is what she did not know, that the warehouse became a second warehouse, then a rail spur, then a port lease, then a company called Meridian Arc Holdings with a public chief executive who does interviews and an owner who does not. That the man on the magazine covers works for me. Why didn't I tell her? I have had a long time to build a good answer, and I do not have one. When my father died, I stopped going to rooms where people knew my name. I met Vivienne years later at a fundraiser in Hawthorne, and when I introduced myself, she asked what line of work I was in, and she did not blink. She did not know. She liked me anyway. So I let a small omission stand, then never corrected it. And a thing you never correct stops being an omission and becomes a structure. I built my marriage on top of it and told myself I was protecting something pure. Northgate is where my father worked. He was a maintenance man at the old freight terminal for nearly 3 decades. And when the manufacturing left and the men he had worked beside started standing in the parking lot with nowhere to be in the morning, he talked the owner into letting him use the disused east wing. He put in benches. He begged tools. He called it a trades hall because he did not know what else to call it. And he taught grown men to weld and wire and read a blueprint at an age when they had been told they were finished. I kept it alive after he died, quietly, never with my name on anything. And here's the irony that nearly cost me everything. Northgate does not belong to me. It belongs to the Mercer Civic Foundation, an independent nonprofit with its own board and charter. And I built it that way on purpose decades ago, because I did not want any one wealthy man deciding the future of my father's building on a bad morning, including me. So, the next day, I drove to the foundation office on Belhaven Street, and I did not get past the front desk. The officer was polite about it. He had a printed sheet with my name on it. Vivienne had formally removed me as a volunteer advisor that morning, and an assistant came down with a written notice and would not meet my eyes. I could not see the trustees. I could not see the board packet. I could not see the file. My wife had beaten me at the level where things actually get decided, and she had done it before lunch. So I went to the building instead. Northgate Trades Hall sits at the end of a street that dead ends into rail. Brick, 4 stories. The name painted on the north face in letters my father never repainted. Inside, the air smells like cut metal and burned coffee, and it has since I was 9 years old. Theo Bell was in the back bay with a grinder in his hand. Early 60s, forearms like cable, a freight mechanic for 30 years before the yard closed. He shut the grinder off and pushed his safety glasses up. "Reed, you look like a man who slept sitting up." Close enough. He wiped his hands on a rag and did not offer any comfort, which is one of the reasons I trust him. He said the sentence that changed the shape of that week. "Your wife told us our bid never qualified." I did not move for a second. "Say that again." Our bid, Theo said slowly, watching my face. The cooperative. 40 of us. We put together an offer for this building months ago. 2 days, thinking my wife was making a bad decision under pressure. In one sentence, that stopped being the story. Theo, I did not know there was a second offer. He set the rag down. There's a second offer, and it's not a hat-in-hand charity thing. Before you ask, he counted it off on his fingers. Financing committed through the credit union and 2 regional lenders. An operating plan, 12 pages, 3 years of projections, and signed adult training contracts with the county workforce board, and 2 contractors that pay us before we spend $1 of it. Higher than the developer? Higher than the developer, he said. Not by a fortune, but higher. And we keep the building doing the thing it was built to do. I asked him how it was delivered. Sealed envelope, courier. I sent it myself. He looked at me carefully. And I know who took it because the courier had to get a signature. And he came back and told me it wasn't a clerk, Reed. She came down to the lobby and signed for it herself. What I had was not proof. Theo had a carbon duplicate he kept in a drawer, because that is the kind of man he is. But the original sealed package, the intake stamp, the receipt, all of it lived inside a building I'd been escorted out of that morning. What I did have was the right question. Why the hurry? I sat in my car in the Northgate lot and made calls, and by sundown I understood the second half of it. The foundation's Northgate shortfall was real. The building needed a roof, an electrical upgrade, and 2 years of operating costs it did not have. But months earlier, Vivian had moved most of the reserve fund into a downtown innovation campus, glass and light, and a naming ceremony. The kind of project that brings in donors who like their charity to look like the future. Nothing about it was illegal. Every dollar was documented. The board had approved it because the board approved what she put in front of them. But the emergency she was solving was one she had helped build. And the fastest way to make that arithmetic disappear was to sell the old brick building that reminded everyone of a version of the foundation she had spent years trying to grow out of. She called me that night. I had expected shouting. She was calm. Vivian is at her most dangerous when she is calm. You went to Northgate, she said. I did. Stay away from Northgate, Reed. I stood up and walked to the hotel window. Why wasn't their bid shown to the board? The pause was long enough that I heard her breathing. Because I run the foundation, she said. You used to understand that competent people make hard decisions. And there it was. She was not confused. She had not been fooled by a developer with good shoes. She had looked at a qualified offer from 40 working people, decided the board did not need to see it, and never once considered that anything but leadership. Vivienne, this weekend, she said, and hung up. Sloan met me the next morning at a diner near the interstate, and she made me wait several minutes before she got out of her car. My sister runs the finance side of the foundation, and she has been telling me the truth about myself since she was old enough to form sentences. She sat down and did not order anything. Before I risk my job for you, she said, tell me something true. I should have told her everything right there. The rest of this story turns on the fact that I sat across from my own sister and gave her a piece instead of the whole. I have resources Vivian doesn't know about, I said. Sloan closed her eyes. Reed. She said my name the way you say it to a man standing too close to an edge. That sentence, that exact sentence right there, That is why she thinks you're a liar. I'm not lying. You're not telling either. Do you know what the difference looks like from the outside? Nothing. She leaned in. Years ago, when the foundation nearly missed payroll, Vivian asked you to guarantee a bridge loan, one signature. You said no. I remember what I said. I said the foundation needs to survive without my money. That's what you said. Do you know what she heard? Sloane's voice did not rise, which made it worse. She heard, "My husband won't help me." That's the whole sentence, and you never explained the rest. Because explaining the rest would have meant explaining you. I sat there and let it be true. I had thought I was protecting the independence of an institution. Maybe I was. But a man can do a principled thing and still use it as a wall. And I had lived behind that wall so long I stopped noticing it had a door. Sloane looked out the window for a while. "The bid isn't in the board packet," she said finally. I did not move. "I didn't break into anything. I'm the finance director. I pulled the pact that goes to the trustees before the vote. The same one I pull every quarter, and there is one offer in it. The developer. No summary, no comparison, no note that a second party expressed interest. Theo says she signed for it personally." "Then that's a document," Sloane said. "That's not a feeling, that's a document." She reached into her coat pocket and set something on the table between the sugar and the napkins. Navy enamel, brass edges, the engraving worn shallow by decades of thumbs. True North. "Where did you get that?" "Donation box in the foundation lobby," she said. "She had staff clear your things out of the house. They boxed what they thought was junk and dropped it off for the rummage sale." She pushed it an inch closer. "Dad gave you this the day you opened that first warehouse. You remember?" "I remember more than you think," Sloane said. "I picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, and I put it in my pocket instead of on my lapel. It took me several more days to understand what that meant." Sloane called Theo that afternoon from her personal phone, standing in the parking garage. She confirmed 3 things: the date the bid arrived, who accepted it, the amount. Then she told me what it was going to cost. "If Vivian finds out, I'm finished at the foundation, not fired quietly. Finished. She'll make sure every board in this county knows I went around my chair." "I can make sure you're okay," I said. I meant it kindly. It was the worst thing I could have said. Sloane put both hands flat on the table. "That, right there, that is the whole problem with you." She looked at me until I had to look back. "Stop trying to solve everything with something you refuse to explain." By the middle of the week, for about 6 hours, I believed we were going to win. Sloane did the part I could not, because I had no standing, and she was still an officer of the foundation. She went to 2 trustees, one at a time, and accused no one of anything. She asked one procedural question. If a qualified offer existed and had not been presented, what would the board be required to do? Both of them gave her the same answer. They would move to postpone the vote pending review, provided somebody could put an actual delivery receipt and a duplicate bid in front of them before the signatures. One of those trustees was Clara Voss. She asked to see me in person, and we met on a bench outside the public library, because Clara Voss does not conduct serious business anywhere she cannot see the sky. She looked at my hands. I had been turning the pin over between my fingers without realizing it. "Did your father give you that?" "Yes." She had spent years as a commercial banker, and I watched her decide how much of what she suspected she was willing to say out loud. "Then either you are lying to everyone here," she said, "or your wife has no idea who she married." I did not answer her. The truth, on that bench, would have looked like a rich man buying a trustee, and that was also convenient for me. Both things are true. Theo found the courier envelope copy that night in a drawer under a stack of program certificates, the duplicate bid, all 12 pages, the financing letters, the training contracts. So by that night we had the bid, the man who sent it, 2 trustees ready to demand a postponement, and a finance director who could testify the packet was incomplete. I called my wife. "Postpone the closing," I said. "No. Vivian, you know what I found." There was no anger in her voice at all. That should have told me everything. "Then bring it," she said. She moved the next morning, and she moved first, and she moved on a level I had not thought to defend. Early that morning, she called an emergency closed session of the executive committee. Not the full board. 5 people, no public notice required, entirely within her authority as chair. She did not mention Theo Bell. She did not have to. She presented a foundation in crisis, a roof estimate, a donor privately concerned about the organization's stability, and a developer offer with an expiration date, and asked for provisional approval to proceed to closing. She got it in under an hour. The final signatures still had to happen at Founders' Night. That much she could not shortcut. But the decision was on the record now, approved, defensible, and nearly impossible to unwind from the outside. Then she found out about Sloan. I do not know how. Sloan thinks somebody saw her in the parking garage on her personal phone. By mid-morning, her badge no longer opened the door on Belhaven Street. Her email was disabled, and a letter of immediate termination for cause was sitting in her car. Cause. That was the word Vivian used. Unauthorized contact with a party to a pending transaction. And then, because Vivian does not stop halfway, she went after the evidence itself. She told the trustees Theo's copy was an old working draft, unsigned, and never formally submitted. And when Clara asked for the intake records from months earlier, the answer came back that the original sealed package could not be located in the file. Not destroyed, not denied, simply not there. Both trustees who had been ready to demand a postponement went quiet, not hostile, careful, which in a boardroom is the same thing. And then Vivienne did the thing I never saw coming, because I had spent decades not imagining that my own voice could be used as a weapon. That afternoon, an audio file went out to the trustees and within hours to 3 donors and a reporter. 40 seconds long, recorded in our kitchen years ago during the worst financial conversation of our marriage. I remembered the light over the sink. My voice, unmistakably mine, saying, "There is no money in my name that I can show you." And a few seconds later, "There are things about my finances you don't understand." That was all. She did not need more. By evening, the story in Hawthorne was not a hidden bid. It was a failed businessman with a collapsed practice and secret debts, publicly attacking the successful wife who had finally stopped carrying him. And here is the hinge of everything. I could not call it fabricated. It was not doctored. I had said those words to my own wife, and I had meant them to be true in a technical sense no ordinary person would accept as honesty. There's no money in my name. It was in trusts and holding structures built by very good lawyers. There were things about my finances she did not understand, because I had spent decades making sure she did not. Vivienne had not invented a lie about me. She had simply held up something I built and let everyone look at it. I lost access. I lost credibility. I lost my sister's position inside the institution, the two trustees, the momentum, and the closing was still coming. Sloane came to the hotel that night. She stood in the doorway and would not come in. "Is it true?" she said. "Not the way she means it." "That is not an answer, Reed." She waited. I did not give her one. She looked at me a moment longer, then went down the outdoor stairs to her car, and I stood in that doorway and listened to her drive away. I sat on the bed and took the compass pin out of my jacket pocket and held it in my hand. Never let money decide who you are. That is what I always told myself my father meant, and I had used that sentence for decades as a permission slip. Sitting in a $41 hotel room with my marriage gone, and my sister's career gone, and my father's building only days from a developer's signature, I understood that a man can keep a secret so long and so carefully that the secret becomes the lie. My method was dead, not damaged, dead. Every plan I made that week rested on the same foundation, which was that I could win quietly from behind without standing in the light. And it had not failed because Vivienne was clever, although she was. It failed because the moment anyone looked closely at the man making the accusation, they found a locked room, and nobody trusts a locked room. So I stopped trying to save the marriage and the anonymity and the building all at once. I picked one. Late that night I called the private number again. "Mr. Mercer, prepare the ownership disclosure," I said. There was a silence on that line that went on so long I could hear a chair move. "Sir, once that goes public, it cannot be put back." "I know. If you think I was reaching for a trump card, you have the wrong idea about what that call cost." Meridian Arc had operated for decades with a public chief executive and a private beneficial owner. The structure was legal, disclosed to every regulator entitled to see it, and unknown to the public. Ending it meant a filing, a press statement, and then the rest of my life. It meant every person I ever met again would meet the number first. It meant security assessments on my sister's house. It meant the ordinary life I'd built in Hawthorne, the hardware store where they call me Reed, the diner where nobody stands up when I walk in, would end that night and never come back. That is the real reason I had not simply announced myself on the porch when my wife pushed my bag out the door. Not pride, not strategy. I'd been protecting something I could only spend once. The next morning, I drove to Sloane's house and stood on her step and said the only thing I had left that was worth anything. "I made privacy more important than trust," I said. "You were right. You were right, years ago, and in the diner, and last night." I told myself I was protecting something. I was controlling what people were allowed to know about me, and I did it to you, too. She did not say it was fine. My sister crossed her arms in her own doorway and looked at me for a long moment. "You're not getting instant forgiveness," she said. "I'm not asking for it." "Then what are you asking for?" "Tonight, at Founders' Night. Tell them how a sealed offer enters that office, and what was in the packet. That's all. Not one word about me." She thought about it for longer than was comfortable. "For the building," she said. "Not for you. For the building. Then all right." The method changed that morning, and it changed completely. No more private persuasion. No more quiet calls to people who owed me favors they did not know they owed. Everything would happen in one room in front of donors and press and trustees where nothing could be buried. And I gave each of them exactly one thing to carry, because I had finally learned that when you ask people to risk something for you, you owe them a narrow, survivable job. Theo would bring the duplicate bid and the courier receipt, nothing else. Sloan would testify to normal intake procedure and the missing packet, nothing else. Clara, if asked, would say only what she personally knew about a compass pin from decades ago, nothing else. Not one of them knew the whole plan. Not because I was still hiding, because if it went wrong, I wanted it to go wrong on me. That afternoon, Theo called from the trades hall, and his voice was strange. "Read the courier receipt. I've been staring past it for days. The receiver line." He paused. "It's not a clerk. She signed it, her own hand, Vivienne Mercer, and the date and the time." I sat down on the edge of the bed. She could argue about value. She could argue about judgment. She could argue that the cooperative's financing was thin, or that the board had elected her to make hard calls. There was exactly one thing she could never say again. She could never say she had not received it. Founders' Night is the biggest evening on the Foundation's calendar, and Vivienne had built this one to be remembered. She moved it out of the hotel ballroom and into the historic freight terminal, the same complex where my father had worked for nearly 3 decades. Long tables, string lights in the rafters, 200 donors, the full board, a reporter from the county paper, and a table near the stage for the developers' representatives. She had made the closing part of the program. The signatures would happen at the podium under the lights, with applause. She wore pastel pink. She always does. A tailored blazer, her hair in that same immaculate bun, and she looked like the most capable person in any room she has ever entered. I bought a dark navy suit that afternoon, and had it altered by a tailor who did not ask why a man needed a suit that fast. And before I left the hotel, I took my father's compass pin out of my jacket pocket, and for the first time in more years than I want to count, I put it on my lapel. I met Sloan in the parking lot. She looked at the pin, then at me. "I spent years thinking that hiding this proved money didn't own me," I said. My sister adjusted it a 1/4 inch, the way she used to fix my collar when we were children. "Maybe telling the truth is the first thing you've done that proves it." That was not reconciliation. I knew the difference. But it was the first time in days that she had touched me on purpose. Inside, a communications staffer stood near the soundboard with a folder and a laptop. Vivienne's people had been assembling something all week they referred to only as the packet. I still did not know what was in it. I only knew there was more than the kitchen recording. I also knew, from a trustee who still returned my calls, that she intended to make 2 announcements from that podium: the sale of Northgate, and her formal separation from me. One evening, one narrative, both of them hers. She did not need to destroy me. She needed nothing important to happen outside her own hands. She found me in the corridor behind the stage shortly before the program. We were alone, which we had not been in days. Her eyes went to my lapel. "You're really wearing that old thing? Dad gave it to me." "Your father," she said, "understood work. He got up every morning of his life, and he did something, and everybody could see what it was. She let that hang. He would be ashamed of what you became. I have been hit harder by professionals." That one landed. Standing in that corridor, with my wife of decades 2 feet away, I came within a breath of telling her everything privately, quietly, the way I had done everything else in my life. I stopped, and not because I wanted to trap her. I stopped because a private truth can be buried. It becomes her word against mine in a hallway with nobody to hear it. Everything I had done wrong for decades I had done in hallways. Tonight, I said, I'm going to tell the truth, all of it. Vivienne looked at me for a moment, and something almost like curiosity crossed her face. And then it was gone. So am I, she said. She was magnificent on that stage. I want that in the record, too. She talked about stewardship and discipline, about the difference between honoring a legacy and being held hostage by one, about how the hardest thing a leader does is make the responsible choice instead of the sentimental one. The room was with her completely. Some of those donors had known my father. Then she said she had one personal matter to address, and the room went very still. She did not name my debts. She did not have to. She said that after decades, she had come to the end of what she could carry, that she had spent a long time protecting someone who had not been honest with her, and that she was formally separating from her husband. She sounded sorry. 200 people turned and found me standing at the back in a navy suit, and I watched them decide what I was. Then the developers' representatives came forward with the folder, and Vivienne said, "Before we sign," and picked up the pen. I stood up. I did not shout. I have never needed to. "Before you sell Northgate," I said, "show the board Theo Bell's bid." The room turned again. Vivienne did not flinch. "There is no qualifying bid from Mr. Bell," she said. "The board has reviewed every qualified offer." Theo Bell walked up the center aisle in a jacket I know he bought that afternoon and put 12 pages on the podium. "Financing letters," he said. "Operating plan. 3 signed training contracts." "That is a working draft," Vivienne said, without even glancing down. "It was never formally submitted. Anyone can print a document." And then my sister stood up. "Miss Mercer terminated me," Sloane said. "So you can all decide what my word is worth. But I ran the finance office for years. A sealed offer gets logged at intake. It gets a receipt with a signature and a timestamp, and it goes into the packet trustees receive before a vote." She looked around the room. "There is one offer in that packet. I pulled it myself." Theo laid the courier carbon sheet on top of the 12 pages. "The receiver line," he said. Clara Voss put on her glasses, leaned over the podium, and read it aloud in a voice that had spent decades reading numbers to people who did not want to hear them. "Vivienne Mercer, March, 10:50 in the morning." You could hear the string lights buzzing. And my wife did not fold. She looked at the carbon sheet, and she looked up, and she said, "Yes, I received it." She let that sit until the room leaned in. Receiving a package does not mean I believed it deserved to be presented. This board elected me to exercise judgment. 40 men with a credit union letter and a dream is not a qualified buyer for a 4-story building with a failing roof. I made a call. That is what a chair does. It was a good answer. It was almost a great answer. Then she turned and pointed at me, and her voice changed. "And now, everyone in this room should be asking why a man with no financial standing whatsoever suddenly cares this much about a multi-million-dollar transaction." She raised a hand toward the soundboard. "Play it." My own voice came out of the rafters of my father's freight terminal. "There is no money in my name that I can show you. There are things about my finances you don't understand." 200 people listened to me, being a liar in my own kitchen. and they did not hear it wrong. The room turned against me for the second time that evening, and this time it was earned. Vivienne waited for the last echo to die. "You want to talk about hidden information," she said. "Go ahead. Tell them what you hid from your own wife." That was the moment. I could have played the card and let the number do the work, and the room would have gasped, and I would have won the evening and lost the only thing I had left worth having. I said, "She's right about that." 200 people went silent. "I let privacy become deception," I said. "My wife deserved to know who she married. I told myself I was protecting something pure. What I was really doing was controlling what she was allowed to know. For decades, she is not lying to you. That recording is me. I let the room hold it, but my dishonesty does not make hers honest." Vivienne's chin came up. She looked at my lapel, reaching for the one thing left in the room she did not understand. "And what is that supposed to prove? That pin?" Clara Voss rose slowly from her seat at the second table. "Years ago," she said, "I sat on the credit committee that financed a warehouse expansion for a small freight company on the Delaware line. The founder wore a navy and brass compass pin at the signing. Dark enamel, brass edge, true north. I have seen exactly one of those in my life, and I never forgot the mark because I asked him about it, and he told me his father made it." She looked at me. That company was called Meridian Arc. The name moved through the room like weather. Vivienne said, "A pin does not make somebody a billionaire." And Clara Voss, who is an honest woman, said, "No, it doesn't." She sat down. She had said exactly what she knew, and not one word more. And it was not enough, and it was never going to be enough. I looked toward the back of the room. Meridian Arc's corporate counsel had been standing by the doors since the evening began, holding nothing. I had called her the night before after Sloan walked away from my hotel door. "Release it," I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Then a phone buzzed at the developer's table. Then 2 more. And the reporter from the county paper stood up so fast her chair went over backward. And then it was every phone in that building at once. Meridian Arc Holdings had filed and published a beneficial ownership statement for the first time in decades, in language no lawyer could soften. The company named the man who owns it. I watched 200 people look down at their screens, and then up at me, and I watched the arithmetic land, because Meridian Arc is not a name most people know, and the holdings are not a number most people have had to imagine. Ports, rail, transmission corridors, data centers on 4 continents, held privately by one person. Not a millionaire, not a wealthy man from Hawthorne. More than any fortune in that room had ever been compared to. More than all of them combined. Vivienne did not faint. She did not cry. She stood at that podium with her hands flat on the wood, looked at me, and said the most dangerous sentence anyone said all night. "You hid $180 billion from your wife, and you want these people to think I'm the villain?" And she was partly right. She has always been partly right. That is what made her worth decades. "No," I said. "I want them to know I was wrong too." I walked up the center aisle, so I did not have to shout across the room. "But you did not throw me out because I lied about being rich," I said. "You threw me out because you believed I was poor. You knew nothing about any of this a few days ago. You looked at a man you had been married to for decades, decided he had nothing left, and put his bag on the porch in front of the neighbors." She did not answer that. And you did not hide Theo's bid because I deceived you, I said. You hid it because it threatened an outcome you had already chosen. Vivienne turned to the security officer standing by the stage. Remove them, she said. All three of them. Nobody moved. Then a trustee at the front table stood up, an orthodontist named Hayes, who had never once spoken at a meeting. Chairwoman, he said, did you deliberately omit a qualified offer after personally receiving it? I am the chair, Vivienne said. I was elected to make decisions. He asked her twice more. She gave him the same sentence each time. She never confessed to anything. She did not have to. Everyone heard a woman who could not say the word yes and could not say the word no, because both would have meant admitting an outcome had once existed outside her hands. The board voted that night, in the open in front of the donors. They suspended the closing and reopened the review. Then they voted to place Vivienne Mercer on temporary leave pending an independent review. I did not ask for either vote. I did not fire my wife. I did not need to. Then I said the last thing, and it is the only part of that night I am actually proud of. I will not be bidding on Northgate. The developer's attorney actually laughed, thinking he had misheard. If Mr. Bell's cooperative wins this building through the reopened process on the merits against anyone who wants to compete for it, then, afterward, I will fund an improvement grant for the roof and the electrical service. I looked at Theo. No naming rights, no seat on anything, no control provisions. My name goes nowhere on that building, and neither does my father's, because a man who buys the ending has not changed. He has only changed which hand he uses. The closing never happened. The independent review took weeks, and it confirmed what everyone in that terminal already knew. A qualified offer had been received, logged, and never presented. The board reopened the sale, and Theo Bell's cooperative was ruled a qualified bidder with the strongest mission alignment on the table. Vivienne did not chair that review. She resigned before they could vote on removing her, which was the last decision she got to make on her own terms. And I understood why she took it. She did not go to prison. Nothing she did was a crime. She lost a chairmanship, a reputation she had spent years building, and the certainty she wanted more than she ever wanted me. In this life, that is usually what justice looks like. We met one more time in a lawyer's conference room months later, and afterward we sat in her car for 10 minutes because neither of us wanted the last conversation of a marriage to happen in front of a paralegal. If you had told me who you were, Vivienne said, looking straight ahead, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe, I said, but if I had really been broke, what you did still would have happened. She did not argue. That is how I knew it was over, and how I knew she had heard it. I owed you the truth, I said. Yes. You owed me dignity. She put both hands on the steering wheel of a car she was not going to start. Yes, she said. We were both right about one thing each. It was not enough to keep anything alive. Months later, I drove out to Northgate on an ordinary morning. No entourage, no press. There is a security team now, and they wait in the lot because that is the price of the call I made in a hotel room. Navy jacket, compass pin on the lapel. Theo was in the back bay with a clipboard arguing with a contractor about conduit. He saw the pin first, the way he sees everything. You finally decided to wear that thing? I touched it. Yeah. What changed? I looked across the old workshop floor. at the benches my father begged for, at 4 men in their 50s bent over a welding table learning something they should have been taught decades ago. I stopped confusing privacy with honesty, I said. It is still just a small piece of enamel and brass. It is not worth $20. The difference is that I do not hide it anymore. So, tell me honestly, if someone you loved threw you out because they thought you had nothing, would you reveal the truth and give them another chance? Or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments and let me know where you're watching from.